our other regular presentations. Quick rundown, we have Patrick Dussard coming up on Friday, the technical fellow that accompanies a lot of the work that Scott does. As usual, we have our web calendar, all of our YouTube recordings, Facebook, Twitter. On behalf of everybody at Lidnug and the entire team would like to thank you for attending this, and we'll hand over to Scott himself. Are you ready, Scott?
Yeah, can you hear me okay?
Yep, we can hear you fine. Take it away.
Great. Well, thanks everyone for joining us again. And for people that haven't done one of these chats before, kind of as was mentioned, I typically do them every 2 or 3 months. And it's an unplugged format, even though it is actually online. So, but by unplugged basically means there isn't a set agenda. Instead, what we kind of try to do is have people ask as many questions as they can over the next 90 minutes. It can be basically on any topic you want. You can just use the live meeting tools, the Q&A panel that you should be able to see probably at the top of your screen to ask a question. And then what I try to do is basically answer as many of them as I can over the next 90 minutes. So pretty much any question is fair game, and look to hopefully spend the next 90 minutes covering some pretty good stuff. So if you have a question, do go ahead and start filling it out in that tool. And then while people are starting to populate a few of those there, let me go ahead and sort of broadly do a quick intro on some of the things that have been happening over the last couple of months. And then we'll take it away with the questions. One thing I will also mention on the questions is what I'll try to do is actually answer a bunch of them in a row, meaning I'll pick up a specific topic and then try to hit several of the questions. So if it looks like I skipped over your question, it's probably because I'm putting it into a different bucket and I'll come back to it. And so I'll try to do a lot of client questions and a lot of server and a lot of cloud, and I'll just kind of rotate just so I'm not on every other question changing the topic. So in terms of some of the stuff that's been happening in the .NET community in the last couple of months, it's been a pretty big time in terms of lots of new products coming out. Hopefully a lot of people here have tried out the .NET 4.5 and Visual Studio 11 beta that we shipped end of February. It's a free download. You get both Express as well as the premium versions of VS to use. It basically comes with just a ton of improvements across the .NET framework. Whether it's in web, there's lots and lots of improvements to ASP.NET. Whether it's to data, lots of improvements coming with EF5. Whether it's with core fundamentals, with some of the improvements we brought with like async to the core framework. Whether it's with workflow, whether it's work with identity, whether it's with WPF. There's lots of improvements kind of across the stack. And I think it's going to be a pretty exciting release to be able to take advantage of. And then within Visual Studio, from a tooling perspective, there's just lots and lots of tooling improvements across the stack. Lots of improvements around the web designer and the web editing support. I've done a couple of blog posts about those last fall, both for the text editor, the JavaScript editor, the HTML editor, the web forms editor, the MVC tooling support with Page Inspector that's come out. Lots and lots of really great improvements there. For both WPF and Silverlight, we're now shipping the Blend Designer that used to be part of Expression Blend and actually running it inside Visual Studio itself. So there's lots of improvements there in terms of overall design experience, in terms of what you can do. The Workflow Designer has gotten a lot richer, as has a bunch of the data tooling improvements as well. And in terms of just the general code editing experience, TFS, unit testing, lots and lots of improvements across the board. On other related .NET aspects, there is obviously with Windows Azure, a number of improvements that we shipped last December that I did a session on that kind of an Azure Firestarter, if you will, at the beginning of December. You can watch online. And you're going to see a lot more Azure-related announcements come up in the months ahead. I actually did a blog post this morning about one new service that we launched called the Windows Azure Media Services, which allows you to very easily work with media and video and stream it in and around the web. That's first of kind of several very big services that you're going to see us come out with, and expect to see me talk a lot more about some of these new capabilities coming to Azure kind of over the summer. Some really exciting things for .NET developers coming out. On the client side then, obviously in addition to VS11 and .NET 4.5, the end of February we also shipped the consumer preview of Windows 8, which allows you to build new Metro applications, very similar to what you can build on the phone. You can build Metro applications using both SAML and HTML. You can use C#, VB, JavaScript, and C++. And specifically for .NET developers, I've seen, if you haven't tried it out, definitely give it a try. There's a lot of really good capabilities that have come as part of that Metro release. And the ability to take the same XAML skills that you know with Silverlight, with WPF, to use same C#, VB, and the core base class libraries that you know, and be able to build applications that are touch-enabled for both PCs as well as tablet devices, and be able to monetize them through a storefront, like the built-in Windows 8 store. Hopefully provides a lot of opportunity, and I think will enable some really exciting things in the future ahead. A few people asked about Silverlight here. Noticed, hopefully people everyone knows, we did ship Silverlight 5 in December, which was a pretty major update of Silverlight. People have asked about future updates. Right now, we haven't announced any specific feature updates. Having said that, you can hopefully see with the VS11 tools, there is a much improved Silverlight Designer that's shipping as part of that, and it's based on the Blend Designer. And then obviously from a XAML perspective, lots of improvements happening and a lot of new capabilities being introduced as part of the Windows 8 release, and the ability to use Metro application or build Metro applications using XAML you can take advantage of. So that was a quick, brief intro. Lots of other things going on, but that was hopefully a quick intro. Let me now take it away with some of these questions. And so again, if you just joined us, you can use the question and answer panel at the top to ask questions, and I will try to answer hopefully as many as possible over the next 90 minutes. And so keep asking away, and we'll go from there. So a few people asked about client questions, so around WPF and around Silverlight. Osama asked, I talked a little bit about Silverlight just a few minutes ago. Osama asked the question, where is WPF going? So we'll go ahead and take that one next. In terms of kind of where WPF is going, so there's an update of WPF coming out as part of .NET 4.5. We call it WPF 4.5. And it includes a number of improvements in the data space around data binding and controls, a number of kind of fit and finish improvements across the stack. And it also, we now support the new Blend Designer within Visual Studio for building WPF applications. In terms of kind of where it's going, WPF is great for building Windows desktop applications. It's what Visual Studio is built in. There's even more WPF-based code inside VS11 than there was with VS10. And so the core shell and the core text editor is actually built in WPF. And so from a capability perspective, hopefully it continues to get better. It is a fairly mature piece of technology at this point, meaning it has lots of capabilities, so you're probably not going to see major new releases that bring with it thousands of new features. But hopefully you'll continue to see us improve it. We use it within our own tools, and I believe even some of the new add-on tools for Windows Server 8 that are shipped in Windows are actually built using WPF. So hopefully that answers a little bit in terms of some of the new capabilities there. Any other client questions before I go to server? I'll come back to the client later too. Let's see. No, asked the question. Adobe is focused, excuse me, its Flash and Flex tools on the production of HTML5 outputs, as well as targeted binaries for mobile devices. Do you see Silverlight WPF going this direction? Is there a place for Silverlight in new development work? There's a couple of questions in there. One is from are there plans to support authoring apps in XAML and then auto-generating HTML or JavaScript apps from them? The answer to that is right now we don't have plans to kind of enable that. In general, I'd say it's hard to build a really good kind of converter from one technology to another. And so I haven't personally used the Flash and Flex tools myself to do that. In general, the feedback I've seen has been kind of very mixed in terms of the quality of the output that you get from them. Instead, what we've been focusing on mostly on the XAML side is how can you take the core set of XAML skills you have and use the same designer and tooling in order to be able to target multiple form factors within it. So obviously there's Silverlight in the browser, but in particular Windows 8 Metro apps is kind of a big thing that we're going to be launching this summer, being built with XAML. And then obviously with Windows Phone apps being built with XAML as well as desktop apps built with WPF. And so the goal there is not necessarily you just build it and push a button and out pops a new form factor, because we do think you optimize the experience for the different device targets. But the goal is that you can actually use consistency of knowledge and tooling and be able to reuse much code, if not all of it, to be able to target different devices and really have optimal experiences for each one. So that's kind of the approach that we've been taking and kind of the strategy going for that. Okay. Let's see. Another client. Let's go ahead. There's a bunch of server questions, so what I'm going to probably do here, actually maybe one more client question, and then I'll probably do some more server ones, then we can come back to client ones a little bit later. Actually, Dave Baker has two client questions asked. Can you please share us with any aspects of the light switch roadmap that you can? Unfortunately, I don't actually run the light switch team. I actually don't run the Silverlight team anymore either. But I'm kind of more focused on the server now. In terms of, so I can't really share any details about the light switch roadmap. I know that team's working hard on kind of some of the future updates, and so likely they'll be able to talk more about them in the future. Shaggy asked the question, what's the plan to support serial ports, aka virtual COM ports for WinRT and Windows Phone? It's a good question. I actually don't know. I don't think there's a plan on Windows Phone to support serial ports. I think there is an API that I'm not sure if it's available to every app or whether there are only people that are building in a certain program, but that you can actually use access the USB port and do interesting device-specific work with it for Windows Phone. For Windows 8 and Windows Runtime, I'm not actually sure what the plan is around serial port access. In general, for building Metro apps, for people that haven't tried it, there is kind of a subset of full APIs that you can take advantage of. So whereas with building desktop apps, you could call any .NET or any Win32 API, in the Metro world, it's kind of a subset, and so you can call many .NET APIs, but not all of them, and you can't actually call any Win32 APIs. Instead, you talk to the Windows Runtime APIs that are available both from C#VB as well as JavaScript and C++. And so I actually don't know off the top of my head whether there's a serial port API. And so I'm going to have to defer a little bit to the Windows team as to whether that's exposed. So let's do a couple of server questions here. Guys have asked, is ASP.NET MVC the future? It's a good question. We're certainly excited about ASP.NET MVC. I wouldn't necessarily say it is the future, in that I think there's multiple futures. I do think it's a great option for people to look at and to learn in terms of delivering, web-based solutions from the server. One of the things that we've done a lot with ASP.NET as part of this release that's coming out this summer is focused it on targeting HTML and JavaScript output based clients, as well as with a new capability that we're introducing called Web API, enable you to kind of target outputting not only kind of HTML and JavaScript, but actually outputting data, whether it's serialized into JSON, whether it's using XML, whether it's using other form inputs, and then also optionally using OData as a way to do higher level data semantics on top. And the benefit of Web API is you can basically call it from HTML JavaScript in the client. You can also call it from a Windows 8 Metro app. You can call it from a Windows Phone app. You can call it from a Silverlight app, or a Flash app, or a WPF app. You can pretty much call it from anything. You can also call it from other devices, whether it's iOS with iPhone and Androids, or iPhone and iPads, or whether it's Android devices. You can call those as well. The Web API functionality is available not only to MVC customers, and it actually ships as part of MVC, but we're also exposing it within web forms as well. And so you can take a web forms app and expose web APIs. You can create an MVC app and expose web APIs. So you can really use that kind of capability from anywhere. And so, what we're trying to do with all of our new kind of capabilities is really enable it to be used in multiple places within ASP.NET. And we think that's going to provide, on the server side, a lot of flexibility and give you kind of a really powerful platform that you can use. So whether you're an MVC guy or a web forms guy, you can take full advantage of all those types of capabilities. Someone asked, what is, if you want to build a cross-platform app, I can't figure out where that question is, but it was something about if you're building a cross-platform, what's the best way, Matt asked, what's the best way to build multi-platform applications using the .NET stack? My sense right now is probably the best way to do it. If you look at all the different types of devices that are out there now, that the best way to build a cross-platform app with the .NET stack is probably with ASP.NET. If you want maximum portability and basically use the combination of emitting HTML and JavaScript from ASP.NET for browser-based apps, so that they work, again, regardless of what type of device, whether it's an iOS, Android, or Windows-based device. And then to use the Web API capability that we're shipping as a way to either have that HTML call back to the server in a richer way to deliver a higher quality experience in the browser, or to use that Web API functionality so that you can expose data and have native apps on those devices take advantage of it as well. And so I think a pretty popular way to do cross-platform kind of reach will be build an ASP.NET app, target the browser first, use Web API from your JavaScripts and from your HTML pages on the client to call back for even richer experience, and then selectively build native app experiences. And obviously on Windows Phone and on Windows 8, you can use .NET to do that. And on iOS and Android devices, you can use the native form factors there, or something like MonoTouch or MonoDroid that's provided by a third party in order to build native experiences there. But that all go back to that same Web API layer that you can expose out of ASP.NET. Adele's asked the question, are there plans to bring VS or part of it on Windows tablets? Well, with the new Windows 8 that's coming out, it runs great on tablets, and so our core, as I've been mentioning, Metro apps, the core part of that experience is touch-enabled, in particular kind of tablet and touch form factors. In terms of plans to bring VS on it, well, because it's one running Windows, you can install VS on a Windows tablet and it'll work. The Windows tablet that's running x86, it'll work. And so yeah, you can absolutely do development on a Windows tablet with VS. Fred asked a question, what's the anticipated release date for MVC4? We haven't published a release date yet. I mean, the cliche is when it's ready. But, more broadly speaking, I'd say we're targeting this summer to ship it. The next kind of milestone you'll see us come out with will be a release candidate for MVC4. and then basically hopefully not too distant future after that, we'll ship the final release. So it's not way off, but it's probably in the summer time frame that we'll ship MVC4. We have not announced, someone asked a question about Windows 8, IE10, and BS11. We've not announced any ship dates yet for that. Obviously, the consumer preview is available for those other releases. MVC4 is a little different in that it ships both on top of VS10 as well as will ship inside VS11. And so if MVC4 is finished ahead of time for some of the other releases, we'll likely release it on the web for VS10 first. And then it'll actually ship as part of VS11 once that goes out the door. Nick Craver asked, will MVC4 allow routing for system extensions, e.g. routes that end in .dll, .csh, etc.? It's an interesting question. I thought you could actually do that today. In general, I'd recommend probably not exposing .dll URLs, but I think you can. You probably just need to go into IS to enable it. But I'll tell you, if you send me email, Nick, I can hook you up with the team and we can help make sure that works if that's an issue you have right now. Let's see. Do a few more ASP.NET ones, then we'll come back and do some more broader ones. Adam asked a question, does Microsoft plan to follow the example of the ASP.NET Web Stack and open source for their frameworks? That's a good question, Adam. Obviously, a couple weeks ago we announced kind of releasing MVC, Web API, and Razor under an open source, Apache 2 open source license, and that we're hosting a live repo of it on CodePlex. We still have a full product team behind it. It's a bigger team than ever. Lots of investment going on in it. But we want to basically go to kind of a more transparent development model where people could basically watch the live check-ins, try out the bits as soon as they're ready so they can give us feedback faster. And then optionally, we are now going to support people actually sending pull requests. In fact, I'm going to probably do a blog post later this week about the first 4 or 5 pull requests that have actually been accepted. It's kind of exciting to see a number of pull requests actually have already made it in the product and will show up for the release candidate. In terms of, do we plan to actually go and enable other parts of the framework under a similar license? We possibly will. It is something that we are looking at. We're kind of using ASP.NET kind of as the first litmus test of it, partly because of where the product is. We ship kind of some of the pieces outside of the core .NET framework, so it's a little easier for us to do that, to have a contribution license, because we don't have to take it into Windows Update releases. And then also just in terms of the community, I think was most passionate around having that open source flexibility. But it is something that we're going to look at for other parts of the .NET framework as well as some of our other server assets. We did, actually, even before ASP.NET, we first tried to do it with this kind of approach with the Windows Azure SDKs, and we announced that in December. It's actually worked really well there, which is part of the reason why we tried it with ASP.NET. So I think we probably will add that kind of model with others as parts, other libraries and frameworks as well. But right now we haven't closed on any specific ones. And Tugberg asked the question: do we have any plans on making EF follow this model? That is one that we'll probably look at, but right now we don't have any announced plans or any kind of formalized plans to do that just yet. Let me do a few more MVC ones, and we'll go back and do some of the other ones. Sean asked a question on the MVC4 subject: what type of new features can we expect it to have? Well, what I'd recommend, Sean, is actually if you install, well, I should do 2 things. One is you can install the beta today. The other thing you can do is if you go back to a blog post that I did in, I believe, February, where I basically presented on the MVC4 beta, or I should do a blog post that summarized some of the MVC4 beta features. And then I also did a talk in the Netherlands that you can watch online, which is a pretty good presentation of MVC4. It's about 75 minutes. And there's tons and tons of features included as part of it, and it generally was considered a really good talk. And the good news is you can actually download the MVC4 beta today and do all those features. Some of the improvements that are included both in MVC3, they're packaged in MVC4, though some other parts of ASP.NET also get these, include bundling and minification so that your page loads faster when you have fewer HTTP requests with smaller payloads. Things like database migrations using Entity Framework, which makes it really easy for you to go ahead and migrate your data without losing any of the data in the database, so you can make schema changes. And you're going to see not only runtime support for that, but you'll see that start to show up with some of our new deployment tools coming out as part of VS11, as well as some updates we're going to do on VS10. So it allows you to actually do migrations on live production databases as well. Improvements around Web API, so you can very easily expose data using kind of HTTP endpoints, whether it's REST or just standard HTTP that you can expose. Lots of improvements to Razor and our View engine that you can take advantage of. Lots of improvements around adding mobile support so that you can more easily target tablets and phones from within ASP.NET. And then on .NET 4.5, you'll also see a lot of improvements around WebSockets and some of the connectivity options for doing push-based notifications through there as well. So lots and lots of improvements. Let's see. A few other. Ronald asked the question, when is WebSockets going to be supported on IIS? And when is that going to be rolled out into Windows Azure? So I mentioned WebSockets in that previous question. WebSockets will show up as part of .NET 4.5, as well as with IIS 8 that ships as part of Windows Server. And you will see it enabled within Windows Azure in the not too distant future. Let's see. Ryan said, perhaps you have heard someone mention the death of ASP.NET. So basically saying that, hey, if you write lots of JavaScript and HTML, you don't need ASP.NET. ASP.NET worker processes will always sit idle, and why do you need the server? Hopefully you heard some of the answers I gave a few minutes ago, where I talked about some of the improvements coming just to MVC4 in terms of capabilities. Lots and lots of improvements coming. In general, I do think you're going to see a move where more code is running on the client, both with web apps in terms of some more more JavaScript being used, obviously along with HTML and CSS, as well as with native apps for mobile devices, where you actually have an app installed. In terms of, I think one thing that's super important, all those things though, is you definitely still write server code with all of those types of form factors, unless it's kind of maybe a consumer game. You almost always are going to end up retrieving data from the server, and even with games, you'll probably do leaderboard and things like that. And so the types of stuff you do on the server will probably change. So, do I think long term that you're going to have server-side paging happening inside of data grid control, where you always do a full page refresh every time you want to change the page index? I think that'll become 5 years from now less and less in terms of kind of from a deployment perspective. Do I think you're going to get the data out? Absolutely, from the server. And one of the reasons why we're pushing on Web API so much as part of the .NET 4.5 release of ASP.NET, as well as the MVC4 release of ASP.NET, is we want to make sure that we have a really elegant, really clean way for you to expose those types of data endpoints and be able to retrieve and update that data. And so Web API is kind of one of the first set of capabilities that we're adding specifically for that. And you're going to see more capabilities in terms of allowing you to coordinate data updates back and forth and so forth within ASP.NET. So personally think ASP.NET's hopefully alive and well, and you're going to continue to see more and more usage of it in a variety of these kind of back-end scenarios, both for browsers as well as increasingly for non-browser native app style devices, like apps running on Windows 8, Windows Phone, iOS, and Android. John Papa, good to see you again. Asked the question, what's my recommendation for single-page apps? What type of support in ASP.NET should we see in the next few releases for single-page apps? This is actually a question John and I talk about every month or so, because it's an interesting question. So, as I mentioned in the last couple of answers, increasingly we are building a set of features that enable you to build really robust client-side code within ASP.NET. By client-side code, I mean increasingly kind of what we call single-page apps, or apps that have a lot of client-side interactivity, a lot of client-side code, typically JavaScript, HTML, CSS, and then call back to the server for data, as opposed to necessarily getting a new UI. Sometimes you have pure apps. There's something called single-page apps, which is literally just one HTML page, and everything else is client-side code that call back to the server. And then sometimes it's more of a hybrid. Often it's more of a hybrid where you still have a combination of some server-side code, and then you also have more client-side interactivity. As I mentioned, Web API is kind of our, one of the first big investments that we're doing as part of this upcoming release to make it really easy to expose HTTP endpoints that you can call from the client, and just things like content negotiation, OAuth, serialization to and from JSON, as well as other formats, and integrates with the new async capabilities that are coming out as part of .NET 4.5. I think of that as the first of many improvements that we're going to build in terms of making it, hopefully ASP.NET the best place to do single-page apps. Other improvements coming out in this release include things like the bundling and minification support that allows you to kind of compress and optimize both your JavaScript as well as your CSS. Things like the async runtime support that we're adding on the server, so that you can avoid blocking the server thread as you go off and do operations. And going forward, you're going to see us invest more in kind of a single-page app template that we support. I think the next step will be to layer on top of Web API and provide richer data management, so we can do change tracking, notifications, and kind of higher-level data services that you can expose on the server and then easily use from any JavaScript framework on the client. A few people have asked questions around Knockout and Backbone and things like that. One thing I would say in the JavaScript space is it is a pretty dynamic space, and so every week there's a new JavaScript framework that looks really good. Our goal right now with ASP.NET is how do we make sure that we work with all of them. And so when you look at Web API, when you look at some of the data stuff with Upshot that we're enabling, our goal is to make sure that you can use Backbone or Knockout or Amber or any of the other frameworks that are coming out. And then basically, we'll selectively choose a few of those frameworks to really double down and optimize on. And so Knockout is a framework that we are shipping as an example within the ASP.NET project templates. We're going to make sure we're straight, but we're not going to do it in an exclusive way. If you want to use Backbone, great. We're going to make sure that you can use Backbone as well, and then it works great within our frameworks. A couple other questions. Cam asked the question, let's see. Yeah, Cam asked the question, is .NET 4.5 release going to work on Windows XP? Unfortunately not, Cam. .NET 4.5 on the client side does require newer versions of Windows. Windows XP is, even though there's a lot of people still using it, is now officially kind of out of support lifecycle. And so .NET 4 will continue to work. You can still, you'll continue to get security patches and all those things, but a lot of the new features will require kind of a newer version of Windows in order to work. In terms of, someone asked a great question around colors and VS, or the lack thereof, I think. Where'd it go? Somewhere here. Someone asked a question. Hey, there was some feedback on the colors around VS. Has the Visual Studio team heard the feedback? Yeah, Randy asked that question. Will you change it? Yeah, so I think the VS team definitely has heard the feedback pretty loudly, and so they are working on responding to that feedback. Yeah, I think they got the message that people wanted a little bit less gray. Stay tuned for more details on that. Dave Barker asked the question, I'm pleasantly surprised by the VS11 beta IDE performance. Has there been a conscious effort to improve it? And yeah, so it's, so the two bits of feedback, the biggest bits of feedback that like the VS team heard as part of the beta cycle was please add color, and wow, this feels really fast and much snappier than I was expecting. And so, talking about the first one, the previous question, for this one here, yeah, there was actually a real push around IDE performance as part of the VS11 release. And, you know, people that tried it out, you know, generally the feedback is pretty consistently, wow, this feels a lot snappier. That was actually a very hardcore push that the VS team focused on. I think there was a feeling that, hey, for the last couple of releases, we weren't doing enough to focus on that. And, you know, with this release, there was a concerted effort to do it, and hopefully, you know, it's great to see the feedback on it in terms of showing up and people seeing it. Alexander says the lack of color in VS is great with a big smiley face. Glad you like that. I think you're alone. So let's see other questions. I think Scott K, I don't know if it's Scott Kuhn, asked, current ASP.NET MVC4 single-page apps can apparently be deployed to iOS and Android app stores using PhoneGap. Is Microsoft planning to offer similar service for ASP.NET apps created in Visual Studio? It's a good question. Yeah, you can definitely use PhoneGap with ASP.NET on the back end. In terms of, we don't provide built-in support for that, but you can definitely use PhoneGap as part of that. So that is something that you can go ahead and do. Yasmin asked a question, are you planning on having a good framework to unit test JavaScript? It's a good question. In terms of, I don't know right now of us creating our own JavaScript unit framework. Someone could be doing it, but I'm not aware of it. Instead, what kind of we've been typically focusing on has been enabling you to use any JavaScript unit framework that you want to, whether it's Jasmine, whether it's QUnit, or something like that. One thing that you might want to check out, I did a linked listing post on the weekend, this past weekend. So if you go to my blog at weblogs.asp.net/Kagu, you can find my last post. Peter Provost did an article that I linked to near the bottom, which is around some of the unit testing improvements that are coming as part of VS11. On the tooling side, and one of the big improvements that actually have come with this release is support for using the VS unit test tools with multiple unit test frameworks. And that includes server-side frameworks like InUnit, XUnit, and others, as well as you can use it for client-side frameworks as well. So I believe there's actually a Jasmine test runner that you can use inside VS, and so you get the same unit test UI tools inside VS, except they're now much faster, more flexible, and you can actually use them against your Jasmine unit tests, which you can use to test JavaScript. So, I think increasingly you're going to see us look at how we can, instead of creating our own new unit test frameworks, how do we actually allow people to use other frameworks that others have built that have great popularity. Let's see, a couple other sort of questions here. Shannon asked a question, what is Microsoft's stance on NoSQL? People don't know NoSQL is kind of a pretty popular effort right now in the development world. It's used a lot with cloud computing. At a high level, NoSQL you can think of as tables without relations, or collections without relations. So in a traditional SQL world, you have tables with relationships, and so it's very much of a relational model. With NoSQL, it's kind of it's not relational, and so you don't typically have joins, and you don't typically have, you don't typically have foreign key primary key relationships with enforced integrity. The benefit of that is that you can evolve your schemas a little bit faster. You don't need to actually make global schema changes. You can actually have separate columns for every row, typically within your NoSQL store. And you don't have some of the scaling bottlenecks that you sometimes get where you have foreign key primary key relationships, and it makes it difficult to scale out across multiple servers. In terms of kind of NoSQL and Microsoft. We haven't announced a formal NoSQL product as of yet, although we do actually have with Windows Azure today, Windows Azure Table Services, which enables you to do kind of basically tables where each row can have different schema, and it provides a way you can scale to hundreds of terabytes of data, and it'll actually partition out on a partition key across multiple servers, and so that's kind of one option to look at if you're looking for something that's super scalable, and that gives you that type of support. A few people have asked, Gregor, I just asked, any plans for a NoSQL document database similar to RavenDB? Right now, we haven't announced anything. We are working with others in terms of to kind of enable them to work well on Windows Azure, and RavenDB is a great option that people haven't looked at that is built using .NET by Oren, also known as Allende on the web, and it's a great solution to check out if you haven't. John asked a question on the plans, also similar here. Can we store XML and SQL for a ghetto NoSQL implementation? You can use XML inside SQL if you want, I guess, for kind of a solution like that. There are some limitations around that, but that is one option you can use for an on-premise solution. Lots of improvements. There are lots of questions. They are kind of all over the map in terms of things. I'm trying to move some of these together. We'll do a few more server ones here. Ken asked a question, now that MVC is open source, what else does Microsoft plan on making open source? I answered that a little bit earlier, Ken. If you missed it, you'll be able to get the audio recording. We are going to look at to see whether or not we are looking at seeing whether or not we can expose other frameworks as well. Right now, we haven't made any plans or announced any plans. Bert asked the question, do I recommend using WCF RIA services or is Web API preferred? It's a good question, Bert. A lot of it depends on what you're doing. If you're targeting, say, like a Silverlight app and you're doing data with change notifications, then obviously WCF RIA services is a great option to look at. If you are just exposing kind of a pure REST-based model, or if you don't need change tracking right now, then I would look at Web API. We are looking at taking the WCF RIA services capability and actually replumbing it on top of Web API at some point in the future, so that you get the best of both worlds. I think that'll be something that we'll talk more about later this year, and provide kind of a nice approach for people that want to use both together. Keith asked the question, will developers be able to take advantage of native C++ development on Windows Phone soon? Unfortunately, I'm not in the Windows Phone team, so I can't really comment on any plans there, so I actually don't know the answer to that one. Unfortunately, I have to skip on that. Steve asked the question, will there be any breaking changes to be aware of for VS extension developers moving to VS 11? It's a good question, Steve. I don't know of any off the top of my head, but I haven't built a VS extension, so to be honest with you, I'm not 100% sure. What I'd recommend is try out using the beta that's available now. Immediately try out your extensions and see whether or not they work. VS 11 does install side by side with VS 10, so you can install it on the same machine and it should just work and basically report any bugs or any kind of compatibility issues you see, and hopefully people can fix them as needed. Kevin asked the question, what improvement in .NET 4.5 am I most excited about? It's a good question. In general, there's a ton of really great capabilities coming out in .NET 4.5. I was actually just looking at a deck this morning that someone was putting together of the improvements across the framework, and there's kind of like 5 or 6 really great improvements on each area of the product. If I had to pick one thing that's kind of cross-cutting across all the framework, probably the part I'm probably most excited about would probably be the async capabilities that we're adding into the languages and that we're then surfacing throughout all the different framework libraries. For people that haven't checked it out, the async capability is pretty darn cool. It really allows you to write asynchronous, highly scalable code in a very, very clean syntax that almost looks synchronous. It almost looks, top-down procedural, but it provides a way that you can use the await keyword as you're doing long-running async calls for like a network or a database. And the end result really lets your code scale. And the nice thing about DS is it also gives you full IntelliSense and full debugging support for that async experience. And that ends up just being super powerful. And I think most people haven't really realized the power of it yet. I think as .NET 4.5 and VS 11 come out, as people start building kind of really great client apps, say with Metro inside Windows 8, or WPF, or Phone, or Silverlight, and start building backends with like Web API that uses async on top of ASP.NET, you really start to see that light up and be a big differentiator for us. Steve Marco asked a question, is Silverlight the only planned container to support PlayReady? Is this the preferred approach for writing client-side video broadcast applications? Good question, Steve. So for people that don't know, PlayReady is the Microsoft DRM technology. It ships as part of Silverlight, but it is also available separately. And so there's a PlayReady SDK that you can license. And so, in fact, if you want to build an iOS or even an Android app, you can license the PlayReady SDK. And build that into your app, and you can play video encoded with that DRM stack. There's also it's built into Windows Phone. It's also available as a framework library for Windows 8 Metro apps, both XAML and HTML-based ones. And so you can use PlayReady pretty much anywhere. It also is used on Xbox as well as a lot of embedded set-top boxes. I just announced on my blog post this morning about the new Windows Azure Media Services release, which provides a lot of media capabilities hosted within Azure. One of those is DRM hosting, as well as license server enablement. And so if you are interested in building broadcast apps, definitely recommend checking out there, joining the beta program, and it will make it really easy to use DRM to any device. Clinton asked a question, Microsoft has not done well communicating a connected TV strategy. Please explain why we should not be developing for Google TV. That's a good question. I mean, I'd say the biggest reason not to develop for Google TV is, candidly, they're not selling very well. And so no one will probably use your app. But in terms of what we're trying to do, probably the biggest kind of announcements that we've done over the last couple of months is around Xbox support. For connected TV. And so you can now, with your existing Xbox 360 consoles, get more than 50 apps exposed through there. And so whether it's in the U.S., you can get a Comcast app, you can get HBO, you can get Netflix. In the UK, you can get Sky and others. And there is a developer program available for the Xbox so that you can build those types of solutions. And so if you are interested in targeting TVs, I'd recommend checking out the Xbox solution. The benefit of the Xbox is there's more than 50 million units in market, and so there's a ready base that you can deliver those apps to, and they're already all connected to a TV already. Let's see. Jacob asked a question. Jacob asked a question, which is, with Windows Azure, I only need a worker role on a scheduled basis. Is there any way to set a schedule so that a worker is only online during certain time periods, rather than scaling up or down? I would like to scale on or off. Good question. The answer is yes, you can definitely do that. There is a couple ways you can do it. One is if you look at the Elastic building block that we have in the Dev Center on Windows Azure. So if you go to the Develop tab on Windows Azure, click on .NET. And on the left-hand side of the nav, I think under the how-to tutorials, there's a post on, I think it's called like Elastic Scale or something like that. There is a patterns and practices guide that actually can show you how to do that. And yeah, you can basically spin on and off services as a way to do that. The other thing is if you only need something that runs in the background and periodically does a little bit of work, like say a cron job that kicks off things. Other thing to look at with Windows Azure is we just recently lowered the price of our extra small instances to basically about $15 per month. And so if you're just looking, and that gives you kind of a full process or full operating system VM running in the cloud. And so if you're just looking for something that wakes up every few minutes and does something, an extra small instance is a pretty good way to do it. You wouldn't want to use it for anything that's very compute intensive, but for cron job like tasks, it's pretty good. How do you verify that new tools and features improves the developer workflow? This is a question from Perfrode. In terms of how do we verify that the new features that are coming out, whether they improve the developer workflow, it's a good question. I mean, generally I'd say we try to keep the teams as connected with developers using the products as possible. And so we do a lot of kind of upfront meeting with customers, meeting with developers, watching how they work, really listening to kind of what their pain points are before we try to build new features. And then generally throughout the development process, we try and validate periodically throughout the way that what we're building is the right approach. Some of the things I talked about in my open source announcement for some of the ASP.NET libraries last month, there's both the open sourceness in the sense of it'd be great to have people contribute code and contribute ideas. But also I'd say, one of the things we're trying to do as part of that process is also use open source as a way that we can get the product in people's hands faster so that we can get feedback on fit and finish items as well as whether we're on the right track as we're building certain features. And so we're also trying to use that type of live repository approach so that on every check-in that we do, we can actually go ahead and have people installing the bits, trying it out, and telling us if they don't like them or if they think we're missing something or, ideally, you got it just right. And so that's another kind of motivation behind that announcement. Graham asked a question, which is, can I talk a little bit about the open source announcement and what it means for VS tools, etc.? I did a good blog post, hopefully last month, that I recommend reading. I talked a little bit about some of the motivation behind it. A couple of things that people have asked, that, especially for enterprise customers, just to make super clear, is that everything we announced in open source is still a Microsoft product. So it's still got the same ASP.NET product team behind it. It's in fact a bigger team than it's ever been. We still release it under a standard Microsoft EULA with a 10-year support agreement. You can still call it product support in the middle of the night and get help if you need to. So, and it still ships with Visual Studio. So it doesn't change any of the things that you kind of expect from a Microsoft product. It's still a Microsoft product. We're charging ahead on it, and you're going to see lots and lots of improvements and investment in it. What we are trying to do is kind of, I mentioned in the blog post just a few minutes ago as I was describing kind of the open process, is we are trying to use it as a way that we can get feedback faster and get the community even more involved in giving us feedback, validating the bits, and where they spot a bug or they want to suggest a small feature, be able to submit it to us and have us look at it. And we go through a pretty thorough vetting process for any code that's sent to us. So we do security reviews, performance reviews, code reviews. So it's not just sort of the Wild West open season and then we can check in. But we are starting to take small patches already in the last 2-3 weeks since we made the announcement, and have integrated a few of them into the product. So I'm pretty excited about it. It doesn't change VS really at all. So we're not right now open sourcing into the VS tooling, but I think it's going to make developing with VS even better. Elijah asked a question. I'm a sysadmin that's looking to make a transition to a developer role in the next 3 to 5 years. I've written some Windows forms and ASP.NET MVC apps to automate processes. I'd like to improve my GUI app skills and taking a look at WPF, but haven't learned it yet. Should I make the jump, or should I start learning Windows 8 and or HTML5 or JavaScript? Elijah, I'd say if you're starting to get involved in client development now, I do think looking at Windows 8 is probably a good way to get started if you want to build native apps. And obviously with Windows 8 you can build Metro apps with both XAML and C#VB and .NET, or you can build them with HTML and JavaScript. And so, if you use WinForms and MVC and you like C#, I would build your Windows 8 Metro apps using C# and with XAML. The benefit of that is it's new, so there's a lot of energy and you see lots about it. And also the benefit is if you build something cool, you can also stick it in the App Store and easily distribute it to others. And I think the App Store capability that's coming in Windows 8 is probably something that even more than the technology is going to be pretty transformative to the developer space, and in particular the .NET developer space, because now there's an opportunity for you to build apps, just weekend projects, or they could be casual apps that you build. And you can now distribute them to potentially hundreds of millions of people. And whether you make them free or you want to try to monetize them, you can do either. And I think that opens up a lot of possibilities. And as a developer that's trying to really learn something and build something cool, knowing that you can have millions of people use it, it's a great incentive to really learn it, make it great, and ideally you can make money on it even better. Well, last question, any dates on when Azure support is going to be enabled with VS11? It's a good question, Philip. It's one I get asked a lot. You're going to see it come in the future. We're working pretty hard on it. You're going to see some big updates to Azure in the months ahead. And one of those will be enabling VS11 support for Azure. Right now, you do need to install VS10 and use the Azure tooling with VS10, but you will see that support get added in the future. I sort of asked the question, is there any support for portable areas in MVC4, or are we going to need to continue to rely on kind of the existing frameworks, like as part of the MVC contrib, to enable that? Right now, you do need to rely on MVC contrib if you want the portable area support. There is area support inside MVC, but the portable area support where you can package it up as a library that you can distribute across multiple apps. Right now, it's something that really is only available inside the MVC contrib project. John asked the question, do you have a release date for TFS running on Azure? For people that don't know, there's something called the TFS, hosted TFS service that's online today. I think it's tfspreview.com, I think. And basically, it provides TFS running in the cloud, and it's specifically running inside Azure. And it allows you to do source control. It also, as of a couple weeks ago, allows you to do elastic builds and unit tests running in the cloud as well. And so basically, every time you do a check-in, we spin up a build server for you automatically, do the build, run code coverage against it, and then we can also run your unit tests and then measure code coverage against it. It's currently in preview form. We haven't announced the RTM date yet, but it is something we're working on productizing, and you'll see show up in the future. Tiger asked a question. Currently, it's a little bit tricky to create a Windows Azure project that supports multiple web roles inside the same VM. Is there a plan to make this experience easier with new versions of Windows Azure SDKs and VS? You will see improved support in the future for running multiple apps in a single VM. That is something that we're looking to kind of make simpler. Stay tuned for more details. Brian asked a question, will built-in OAuth support be available in the next MVC release or the RC? You will see OAuth support show up in the future, Brian, baked into MVC at some point. We're still trying to figure out when it'll show up. I think our current thinking is it'll probably be exposed via a NuGet package for the MVC4 release, just because we want to tweak it a little bit more and make sure we have it just right. But our goal is absolutely when MVC4 ships, you can very easily enable OAuth, a number of OAuth experiences very cleanly within MVC4. Actually, take that back. I thought you were asking a different question. Yeah, actually, it will even show up in the RC that will have OAuth support, now that I think about it, so that you can do kind of OpenID style logins with Facebook and Live ID in Google and LinkedIn. So that I think will actually be in the RC. There's even richer OAuth support with Web API that we're looking at for some even kind of higher level capabilities. And a lot of different products use different OAuth patterns for APIs, and so we're trying to make sure that we support all of them. And in that space, we will sometimes have separate NuGet-enabled OAuth libraries so that you can support the different patterns easily. Let's see. Josh asked the question, CE4 has been a major pain when linked to SQL support was removed. Is that technology pretty much dead? Link to SQL is still supported, still ships as part of the .NET framework, so link to SQL is not dead. I would say in general, our investment right now on the data side has primarily been more on Entity Framework, and in particular the new Entity Framework Code First support. That I think you'll find with the EF5 release that'll come out as part of MVC4 as well as part of .NET 4.5 provides hopefully a pure superset now of link to SQL. So things like enums and others that weren't supported in EF prior are now being added as part of this release. And from a performance perspective, EF will, with the EF5 release, now be faster than link to SQL. But link to SQL will continue to be supported, still ships. I wouldn't say we're adding new features to it, but you know, it continues to ship and be supported. Raphael asked a question, what's the long-term roadmap for web forms? How easy, difficult is moving to ASP.NET MVC from web forms to ASP.NET? Any recommended resources? Well, so if you look at the web forms 4.5 release that's coming out with VS11 and .NET 4.5, there's a lot of really good improvements to web forms, things like strongly typed data controls, things like much improved data binding support, so that you can bind directly against methods in your code behind as opposed to having to go through data source controls. Lots of improvements in the code editing experience, improved HTML5 output, unobtrusive JavaScript for validation, lots and lots of improvements coming to web forms. So web forms definitely has a good future. We're definitely continuing to invest in it. Question was, how easy, difficult is it moving to ASP.NET MVC from web forms? The good news is the same core ASP.NET under the covers, so things like session state, things like security, you know, C# VB, data, they all kind of work the same. The UI technology is obviously different, but if that is something you want to migrate towards, that's also a good option. How difficult it is really depends on your app. I recommend going to the ASP.NET website. There's some good tutorials on both that hopefully help. Kazi asked a question, any plans to support HTML, JavaScript, JS for phone development app, just like Windows 8? I'm not really sure of the plans there, to be honest with you. I'm going to have to unfortunately defer to the phone team in terms of what they're doing there. Let's see. Michael Smear asked a question. I agree with web apps, you'll see more code on the client, which leads to JavaScript being a first-class player in the whole ASP.NET stack. Unfortunately, it's still not a first-class player yet in Visual Studio. Any changes, trend there, bigger, better in-browser development tools? What I recommend, Michael, is definitely check out the new VS11. There's lots of improvements around JavaScript editing and JavaScript development for front-end development in particular, coming as part of this release. If you go to my blog at webblogs.asp.net/skagu, with my linked listing series that I did this weekend, I linked to a great post that Scott Hanselman did, like last week, on front-end development with VS, where it actually just talked about front-end web development, you know, in other words, CSS, HTML, completely independent of ASP.NET, and some of the improvements on the tooling front coming as part of that. And with VS11, I think you see some really nice improvements. The other thing that obviously with MVC4 and with ASP.NET in general, tons of improvements around front-end development. The other thing I'd recommend checking out is the new page inspector support that's coming with part of MVC4. That integrates some of the browser-based development tooling that's improved in VS11 directly with MVC. From a tooling perspective, it's pretty gas, and so I definitely recommend checking that out as a way to make some improvements there. Jim Marsh asked the question, what's happening around Windows Azure and Windows Workflow hosting? There were several starts with Azure apps, which include support for workflow, but those have gone silent. I know we can sell a host right now, but this requires us to create and maintain our own persistent providers. Stay tuned, Drew. There is some improvements coming out with workflow with Windows Azure in the year ahead. Until then, you can do self-hosting of the Windows Workflow framework within a worker role, but we are looking to try and make it even easier. You know, stay tuned for more details on that. hopefully in the future. Adelaxi asked a question, are there any upcoming price reductions for Windows Azure? Basically, the one truism for pricing with the cloud is it seems to always get cheaper. So I don't think we have any planned ones right now, but in general, every other month or so, we tend to drop our prices on Windows Azure. And so we did some price adjustments last month, the month before, and the month before that. And so, we're constantly, as our efficiencies get better, we drop the price. As the market gets more competitive, we drop the price. And so I'm sure there will be more price reductions in the future as well. One nice thing about Windows Azure is it's a pay-as-you-go kind of model. So you only pay for what you use, and so once a price reduction actually happens, you basically get to take advantage of it immediately. You're not actually having to buy up front a license. You get that benefit immediately. Pavel's asked the question, do you plan Silverlight on Windows Phone 8? Whether apps which were great for Windows Phone 7 will run on Windows Phone 8. I believe the Windows Phone team has answered that a couple times in blog posts because people have asked that question. The plan is, for Windows Phone 7 apps to run on Windows Phone 8. But I'm not on that team, so I'm going to defer you to the Windows Phone team, but I believe that's the answer there. David asked, Komar asked a question, what about Silverlight WPF? Will they be merged? Will something still run in the browser like a plugin or applet? Over time, we've been kind of merging our XAML stacks more and more. And so we try to basically have commonality across the different technologies as much as possible. I don't think you'll ever get to kind of one XAML stack that does everything. But we are trying to make sure that when a feature shows up in one, it gets added to the others. So I don't think there's any plans right now to merge them per se, but hopefully you will see more commonality. In terms of will something still run in the browser? Yes, Silverlight will continue to run in the browser just like it does today. Why so fast? The versions that are released as a beginner, it's hard to learn directly. How would you guide students in the new .NET world to start to have a good career? In general, I'd say sometimes it feels like technology is moving fast. In general, I'd say when we move fast, people say you move too fast. When you move slow, people say you move too slow. There's never really a perfect middle ground. In general, what we're trying to do is how do we basically have kind of a common roadmap with .NET, right? .NET's now 12 years old. We've been pretty consistent on that roadmap. The code that you write with .NET 1 continues to work with .NET 4.5 12 years later. Hopefully have a great deal of consistency throughout that so that, as we introduce technologies, we try to, wherever possible, make them similar. So with things like Link, things like async, even things like XAML, we try to make sure that in all the different use cases of them, that we try to make them as consistent as possible. So in terms of, if it feels like we're moving fast, I think it's better than it feeling like we're moving too slow. And hopefully you know that as we're moving fast, we are trying to keep a consistent pace and consistency throughout the stack. What's the best place to get started? I would say the best place to get started is probably with the latest version because, that will enable you to, use all the new capabilities. It's a good place to start as any. Patrick asked a question, can I speak to the future of the .NET Micro framework and the growth in the embedded device market and Microsoft's participation now and in the future? Yeah, so for people that don't know, we have something called the .NET Micro framework. It's a really cool framework that's out there, and it allows you to kind of use C# and very base set of .NET skills in order to build apps that run on embedded devices. And so you can actually buy a board. You can download .NET Micro framework for free and use it with Visual Studio, and then you can buy boards on Amazon, and they're as cheap as about $19. And you just plug it into your PC, and then you use kind of a serial port or USB to basically zap the board, and then your app is running on the board. And so these boards are really, they're not computers, they're not operating systems, they really are embedded devices. And there's a bunch of really cool things you can do with them. If you've got if you got someone who's interested in learning programming, they're great for kids above a certain age, where it makes programming real because it's you're kind of turning lights on and off, and you can make motors run, and there's some cool stuff you can do with them. And so I definitely recommend checking those out. I don't know right now the plan of that micro framework. I don't run the CLR team anymore. I'm kind of more focused on the server side of .NET as well as Windows Azure. So I still do run ASP.NET, WCF, and workflow, and Entity Framework and pieces like that. But the micro framework team no longer reports to me, but I believe they're alive and well and doing great stuff. T asked the question, Windows Azure seems to require a Windows Live account to manage it, which most companies do not allow. Is it possible to use an Active Directory account in order to manage Azure? Right now, we do require a Windows Live ID in order to sign up, as you kind of noticed there. It is something we're looking to enable in the future, even richer login support for other approaches, but it's not something that we support right now. Gustavo asked a question, what's the future improvements on Windows Azure Service Bus, and how will that affect the BizTalk server users? If you don't know, Service Bus is a really cool service that runs in Windows Azure. It's a messaging system that lets you do a variety of different messaging mechanisms. We do support something called Relay, which is for synchronous WCF calls. We support queuing and pub sub for fan out and kind of more messaging style scenarios. It's a great feature that you can take advantage of. And you're going to see us continue to invest heavily in Service Bus and do lots of things with it. Gustavo asked the question, how will it integrate with BizTalk server? You will see richer integration between BizTalk and Service Bus going forward. We did a few months ago announce our BizTalk 2012 R2 plans. So we are talking about the next release of BizTalk already. I think you'll see some nice integration with Service Bus as part of that as well. Eric asked the question, are there any improvements that we can expect in VS related to the project system during project reloads changes for distributed source control users, i.e. changing a local branch makes VS unhappy? It's a good question, Eric. I think you're going to see more improvements around distributed source control support in VS in the future. I don't know the exact plans, but I think you will likely see some support there. Jean asked the question, will Entity Framework be able to query catalog? You certainly can query catalogs. I'm not sure I understand exactly what you mean. If you send me an email, scott@microsoft.com, I can try to get your exact question answered there. Dan asked the question, will we have new XAML engines in the future, Windows RT and beyond, as Win32 finally dies? Will Silverlight WPF be closer in post-Silverlight 5? Well, the big XAML engine that we're talking about right now is obviously the one that ships as part of the Windows RT, as part of Windows 8. That's kind of the big one that we're kind of focused on right now. So I'm not entirely sure the question, but that's probably the one I say we're focused on right now. John asked the question, will Microsoft have a way to run JavaScript on the server? One of the John that we have been doing the last 6 months is been working with the Node.js community. And so as part of Windows Azure and other efforts, we're going to make sure that Node, which is a way to run JavaScript on the server, works great with Windows and interoperates with a lot of our stuff. And so in general, I'd say that's probably one of the big things that we've announced already that allows you to do that. And the nice thing about the approach we're taking is that it allows you to use all the existing Node libraries out there and run them great on Windows. Deanna's question, sorry, I only partially heard. Did you mention unit test framework support for client-side unit test libs, as in JavaScript? Yeah, Dan, I did actually talk briefly about that. If you go to my latest link listing blog post on my blog, I linked to an article from Peter Provost near the bottom of the post around unit testing with ES11. And one of the big improvements that's coming is client-side tooling support inside VS for multiple frameworks, one of which is JavaScript frameworks like Jasmine and QUnit that you can use. A tool asked question, will Microsoft continue to concentrate on unit testing? Will MS Test provide mockings? Yep, we are definitely focused on improving unit testing. Again, go to that blog post that I just did, and you can learn more about some of the improvements coming as part of the VS11 release. Matt asked the question, is Code First using migrations a good fit for SQL Azure? I do think it's a good fit, Matt. For people who don't know, the Code First support is a really clean way to do Entity Framework, and the new migrations feature allows you to very easily evolve and update database schemas without dropping data. And both work with SQL Azure, and you're going to see even richer tooling support for both EF Code First and for EF Code migrations within our deployment tooling, and that will work with both SQL Server as well as SQL Azure. Peter Shaw asked a question, will Microsoft be giving those users who wanted the ability to switch their Windows 8 install to use a traditional Windows desktop? Or are they going to be forced to use Metro and not have the choice? Well, Windows 8 does include a desktop shell, and so it's actually pretty easy to go into the desktop shell. I'm actually doing this talk within a Windows 8 desktop shell right now. In terms of the exact plans of the user experience, I'm going to point you at the Windows Server blog, where they share more details around those plans. Another person asked the Metro question, Keith Reichart. There's an abrupt transition when switching between desktop and Metro apps in Windows 8. Is there work being done to make this a smoother experience? For example, desktop app loads a Metro app for data visualizations with a touch optimized interface. Again, I'm going to have to point you to the Windows 8 blog, team blog, for more details on that. They're the best people to comment on it. Colin asked a question, what's the purpose of using Web API when we already have WCF? And is Web API going to replace WCF in the future? It's a good question. Web API, WCF in general is kind of designed, I'd say, for kind of a broad set of communication protocols, and in particular supporting the WS star and SOAP-based protocols. And that enables a really kind of broad set of rich capabilities that you can use. And for people that have implemented WS star, WCF we think is the best way to both implement it as well as call that. There's also this trend that's kind of been emerging, which is kind of the Web API trend, which has been increasingly popular the last couple of years. These are kind of protocols that are not based on things like WS star, but are basically built on top of raw HTTP itself. And so they don't use higher level concepts like fault domains or fault exceptions. Rather, they use their HTTP status code to indicate success or failure and things like that. And that's why we came up with the Web API support that we have, is to kind of enable you to easily build and consume those types of services. We don't per se think it replaces WCF. We think they actually both have a place in the world. And so if you're doing like an enterprise workflow, and you want things like transactions or higher level capabilities, WCF has that, and WS star has that on other stacks as well for Java and other platforms. If you're building a app for, say, an iOS device or for an Android device or for JavaScript running inside an HTML page in a browser, that's where we think Web API makes more sense. And we are seeing some people also use Web API then for server-to-server communication as kind of an open way to do it, and so you can do that as well. Great thing is it's still .NET. You can use, you can build actually APIs that are both WS star and Web API, and expose them as well as HTML from within your server ASP.NET app. So it doesn't really replace it, but we think they're pretty complementary. Nicholas asked the question, what's the future of MFC? It's a good question, Nicholas. I don't actually run the C++ team, and so I'm probably not the best person necessarily to ask about that. So unfortunately, I can't answer that directly. It's obviously continues to ship and it's part of ES 11, so I can say that, but I don't know the long-term roadmap there. Bill, last question. I ran up my bill a little bit with compute costs, and all I have is a few play sites, almost no traffic. I love the idea of PaaS, but I'm worried about how to tell the CFO how much it will cost. Any advice on getting past this fear? It's a good question, Philip. One thing that I think a lot of people coming to Azure today often get confused around a little bit is how much does it cost? And if I'm just running kind of a small app in a VM, why does it cost money? Basically, at a high level, when you build an app and run it inside our hosted service model today, you are running a persistent VM. You're actually running a VM under the covers, and so you are actually effectively running an operating system with your app hosted inside it, and it's an isolated operating system. And so that's why even if no one hits your app, you're still paying for the compute costs, is because it's still running. Now, the positive side is the compute cost won't change when customers hit the app because you're basically just paying for the compute running. You're not paying by like clock cycles or something like that. You're basically just paying as the OS running. So you shouldn't see any compute cost increase when you actually start throwing load at the app. You will start paying for bandwidth at that point, and it's about I think 10 or 12 cents per gigabyte of bandwidth, but you shouldn't see compute costs change dramatically. If you signed up recently with Windows Azure, we do have what's called a guarantee that we never, a billing cap. So we basically guarantee that we never charge you unless you turn off the billing cap. So, we did have people in the past that would get a surprise bill when they go above the trial. Now, as long as you don't go above the trial limits, you won't get any bill. And if you hit the trial limits, rather than give you a bill, we'll actually turn off your compute VMs and send you an email so that if you continue, you'll get a bill. So that makes it a little bit safer for people to try out and not have to worry about getting a surprise bill. Steve Merkel asked questions. The Windows Azure Media Services platform, in it, what are the encoder products that are supported other than Expression Encoder? It's a good question, Steve. We actually, as part of the announcement that we did today with Azure Media Services, we are actually supporting a set of different media encoding providers. So we support Expression Encoder, but we also support, and I'm just looking it up right now, we also support, announced today, support from Digital Rapids, Atemi, as well as Vanguard, and you can go to the page that I linked to from my blog post about the Windows Azure Media Services. You can find details about all the different partners. But one of the powerful things about the Media Services is that it supports a variety of partners all through a common REST endpoint, and so you can basically choose what encoder you want to use. But the way you program against it works pretty much the same. Joshua asked the question, what value do you feel Microsoft certification, particularly in ASP.NET 4, has right now with all the new things that are coming out? In general, I'd say for certification, there's kind of two benefits for certification. One is if you want to demonstrate to an employer that you have skills. The benefit when you're looking for a job is you can say, I have a certification here, and the employer can say, oh, okay, then that means something. It's also a way that for existing companies with employees, that they can help ensure that their employees know about some of the new technologies out there. And when I talk to a lot of companies and say CIOs, often they'll ask about, hey, how do we enable this or that? And, we're dying to have this feature. And I say, well, we actually already have that in the product. And they're always like taken aback, like, wow, really? Why aren't we using it then? And it's partly the team didn't know. And so certifications do provide a way to basically make sure that everyone has a base understanding of the features in that particular version of the product. So I do think there is some value there. I don't think they necessarily make you dramatically better developers, but they do kind of help ensure that you have kind of the core knowledge. And again, also from a job perspective, it helps demonstrate to an employer that you know the latest bits. Elijah asked a question, do you know of any hosting providers that will host an ASP.NET MVC app for free? Yeah, I believe actually, I think it's Discount ASP is there's someone that's offering right now a free .NET 4.5 hosting offer that allows you to host ASP.NET, MVC, and .NET 4.5 for free. And so if you search on probably Bing or Google for like .NET 4.5 free hosting, you'll probably find a link to it. So I also asked a question, are Windows 8 apps built using HTML and JavaScript downloadable on desktops and Windows Phone devices? No, I don't believe so. So this is, I think you're referring specifically to Metro apps built for Windows 8. Then no, they only run on Windows 8 Metro. And they are built using HTML and JavaScript or XAML and C# and VB and C++, but they only run in the Metro environment on Windows 8. Hugbert asked a question about SignalR. People don't know SignalR is a great project. It's an open source project built by some people on the ASP.NET team. This question is, are we going to make it officially adopted by Microsoft in the future? It's something we're looking at. I mean, it's a great framework. I think you'll see us do more with it with ASP.NET in the future, but I don't know. I don't think for the 4.5 release necessarily we're going to sort of make it officially Microsoft. I think it's working great. It's a great ASP.NET framework, and so we love it, and it is built by the team, but it's not yet an official Microsoft product. Reed asked the question, how will HTML5 be positioned on the Microsoft tech stack moving forward? Yeah, it's a broad question. In general, you know, we love HTML5. We want to make sure it works great on our clients, and we want to make sure that with ASP.NET you can build great HTML5 applications. So, you know, all of our browsers support HTML5 now, and you know, with things like with Windows 8, you can build Metro apps with both HTML5 and JavaScript, as well as with XAML and C#. Leonid asked a question, what is coming to replace App Fabric apps? Any news on application model for Windows Azure? Unfortunately, I can't talk too much more about that right now, but stay tuned. You will hear more about App Fabric and our app model pieces with Azure in the future. Drew Marsh asked the question, are there any plans for Windows Azure CDN to support dynamically served content? To put another way, will Azure CDN ever offer reverse proxy functionality? You can with the, actually Drew, you can with the Azure CDN. It does actually work with dynamically served content today. So for example, like the Windows Azure Media Services that we just announced this morning, will support the Azure CDN as one of the CDN options. You can also use Akamai and others as well. So you can definitely use the Azure CDN for that. If you're looking to do kind of a reverse proxy, you can install the Windows. You can install the IS ARR piece, and that does also provide kind of a reverse proxy support that you can install, I believe, within a web role or worker role, and run it within your service as well. Alan asked the question, what are the plans for Entity Framework? There's a bunch of improvements coming out with the Entity Framework as part of the EF5 release. Probably best thing to just go to the ADO.NET team blog where you can find out more details about it, lots of great things coming out there. Enum support, table value providers, geospatial data types, big perf improvements, lots of good stuff. Pete Brown just updated and said the .NET Micro Framework team did actually release .NET Micro Framework 4.2 under an Apache license, and so that was in relation to kind of a question that was earlier about the .NET Micro Framework and the plans there. And also check out, RNG has the Gadgeter project that you should check out. So search on Gadgeter .NET Micro Framework. Some cool stuff coming out there. Jeff asked, do you know if PECs and moles are going to be supported at least in the near future? I think, Jeff, actually, they're built into VS11, I think. There's some support coming out as part of VS11's unit testing. I think moles is there. I'm not 100% sure. David asked a question, would a framework like jQuery Mobile get picked up similar to jQuery? We're actually shipping jQuery Mobile, David, in both the ASP.NET MVC and ASP.NET Web Forms projects as part of .NET 4.5 as well as MVC 4. So yeah, we are actually distributing it just like we do with jQuery. Sean asked a question about event-driven IOCP model and .NET 4 parallel tasks. To give some examples where parallel tasks could be scalable. I confess I don't know off the top of my head there. Sending me out, I can maybe try to find someone that might know the answer to that. Okay. Jean Sebastian asked a question: is it possible to query search with free text entity framework? Is that going to be supported in EF5? I don't know, Jean, but if you send me mail, I can try to find out. Oops, we are unfortunately running out of time. Scott K asked a question, clarifying my previous question about PhoneGap. I think Microsoft should create a service like PhoneGap to allow developers to build apps that can deploy to any device in the App Store or from VS. Yeah, I think that's a good suggestion, Scott. I'll pass it along to the team. Contan asked, can we get the Windows Phone team to set up one of these presentations so you don't have to keep batting away their questions? Smiley face. That's a good suggestion. We should try to get the Windows Phone team to present here. John Christensen asked the question, any plans in the works for Azure email services similar to Amazon's SES service? Good question, John. Actually, if you go to the Windows Azure website right now, so windowsazure.com, click on the Develop tab. On the left-hand side, under Tutorials or Services, there's actually an email service that we now document. It's actually something we put together with a partner of ours. So it's not an official Azure service, but it works great within Azure. And it does allow you to do all the same email capabilities that you can do with Amazon's SES. So definitely recommend checking it out. And they have a .NET library that you can use in order to build those. Patrick asked a question about, can I speak to the multitasking capabilities of Windows 8 Metro apps and the ability to run stuff in the background? Unfortunately, I can't really speak to that. I'm going to have to point you to probably the Windows 8 team blog as well as the Windows 8 developer blog, and they can probably give you the best answer to that. Sid asked the question, apart from red, what's my favorite color? It's probably blue. Is ASP.NET 4.5 shipping with VS11? Yes, the answer is ASP.NET 4.5 is shipping with VS11, and it's actually C# 5 that ships with VS11. John Galloway clarified for people that the person was asking about free ASP.NET hosting. If you go to the ASP.NET website and click on so ASP.NET/vNext, we actually do list link to ASP.NET 4.5 hosting providers, including ones that have free offers. Hugbert asked a question. It's unfortunately my last question that I can answer today because it's people showing up to my next meeting here. But if you have all your data in one data center in Azure, what if an unexpected event happens and all the data inside the data center is lost? In other words, when we put our data there, the conflict will still be there. For things like storage, we do have a feature where we actually mirror or geo-replicate your data to another data center at least 500 miles away. So that is one approach that you can use to make sure that your data is replicated there. You can also obviously take your data out of the data center and save it locally in your own enterprise, and that's probably a good best practice to use as well. So anyway, hopefully I answered a bunch of questions. I want to thank everyone for joining. If you joined late and missed some stuff, I will post an update on my blog that links to an audio recording of this talk, so you can go ahead and listen to it later. And again, I'm going to do more talks of these in the future, so if I didn't get a chance to answer your question, please do join in the next time, and until then, best of luck with .NET, and thanks for all your support.
Thanks once again for a fantastic presentation, Scott. You do the developer community justice every time you do one of these, and I'm looking forward to number 12. Thank you once again. For all those members that are still out there that are still logged in, this will be on